Moving into the new apartment felt like a fresh start. The building was old, but it had a charm that modern places lacked: original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and large windows that flooded the rooms with light. Among the furniture left behind by the previous tenant was an antique mirror propped up in the corner of the bedroom. The frame was ornate, carved with intricate designs that swirled around like ivy. It was heavy, almost too heavy to move, so I decided to leave it where it was. At first, it was just another piece of the apartment's quirky character. But then things started to feel wrong. The first time I noticed something strange, I brushed it off. I was getting ready for bed, standing in front of the mirror, when I saw a flicker out of the corner of my eye. My bedside lamp seemed to sway in the reflection, but when I turned around, it was perfectly still. I laughed at myself, blaming it on tired eyes and a long day of unpacking, but it didn't stop there. One evening, while I was sitting on my bed scrolling through my phone, I glanced at the mirror. The reflection seemed darker than the rest of the room, the shadows a little too deep. And then, for just a second, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape in the corner of the mirror behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I shook off the unease and told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The mirror was old, maybe warped. That had to be it. Then one night, while brushing my teeth, I saw it again. This time, it was unmistakable. As I bent down to spit into the sink, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. It was smiling. A slow, chilling grin spread across its face, but I hadn't moved a muscle. My hands clenched around the edge of the sink, and my heart pounded as I stared at it, frozen. I forced myself to turn around, to confront whatever was behind me, but there was only my empty bathroom. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow and shaky. I avoided looking into the mirror for the rest of the night. But from that moment, a sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the apartment. Days passed, but the tension lingered, clinging to the air like a damp fog. Each time I walked past the mirror, I kept my eyes down, refusing to meet my reflection. Yet, out of the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, objects slightly out of place, the door behind me slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed it. And sometimes I thought I heard faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing, coming from the direction of the mirror. One particularly cold night, I woke up to the sound of creaking wood. The apartment was old, so noises weren't unusual. But this sound came from inside the bedroom. My eyes snapped open, and I turned toward the mirror. It was dark, but I could just make out the silhouette of my reflection, standing there. But something was different. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its eyes wide open, staring straight at me. I scrambled for the light switch, my hands trembling. When the light flooded the room, the reflection returned to normal, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. My reflection's eyes looked too calm, too placid, as if mocking my fear. I rushed out of the room, spending the rest of the night on the couch with every light in the apartment on. I decided to move the mirror to the storage room the next morning, but when I went to lift it, it felt heavier than before, almost as if something was resisting my efforts. After much struggle, I managed to drag it into the hallway, away from the bedroom, but that night, I dreamt of the mirror. I dreamt that I stood in front of it, staring into my own eyes, only to see my reflection reach out a hand and press it against the glass. The sensation of cold fingers pressing against my skin lingered long after I woke up, drenched in sweat. Curiosity and desperation drove me to research the mirror's origins. I spent hours digging through online forums and old archives. Eventually, I found a thread on a local history website, buried deep among discussions about haunted places. A photo caught my attention. It showed the same mirror, its ornate frame unmistakable. The thread told the story of a woman who had owned the mirror a century ago. She was rumored to have been obsessed with it, spending hours staring into it as if entranced. She began telling people that her reflection spoke to her, that it showed her visions of another world. They found her dead in front of the mirror, her face twisted into a smile that didn't match the horror in her eyes. The mirror was sold off at an estate auction and had changed hands many times since, with each owner reporting strange occurrences before abandoning it. I slammed my laptop shut, my mind racing. It couldn't be true. It had to be some urban legend, but deep down, I knew that the mirror was wrong, no evil. That night, I woke up again, drawn inexplicably to the hallway where the mirror stood. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. When I turned the corner, I saw my reflection standing there smiling that same twisted grin. But this time it spoke. "You don't belong here," it whispered, its voice a raspy echo of my own. "I've watched you for so long. It's my turn." Before I could react, its hand pressed against the glass, and my body froze in place. I felt a pull, a cold, sickening sensation, like my very soul was being dragged toward the mirror. The reflection's grin widened, and suddenly I felt the glass give way, my body tipping forward as if falling into a void. I don't know how long I was in that darkness, seconds, hours, maybe days. When I finally blinked back into the light, I found myself staring at my own back. My own body stood before the mirror, eyes wide with terror, but it wasn't me anymore. I'm trapped inside the glass, looking out, unable to scream or move. It mimics my every expression, every gesture, perfectly. It's living my life while I'm nothing more than a prisoner behind the glass. And now, as I watch, it reaches out to unplug the nightlight I keep by my bed, leaving me in the dark. It was a chilly autumn evening when I decided to visit the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The place always held a strange allure for me, something about the way the headstones leaned into each other, casting long shadows under the fading light. That night, the wind howled softly, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. The idea came on a whim. Bring a radio, listen to some music, maybe catch a local broadcast. It seemed like a way to stave off the loneliness that had crept into my life lately. The radio I brought was an old, battered model with a tuning dial, the kind that crackled when you turned it. I set it on a crumbling headstone and leaned back, letting the static fill the air around me. For a while, it played an old jazz station, the music a soft hum beneath the rustling trees. But then the signal began to waver. The jazz faded, replaced by the eerie hiss of static. I fiddled with the dial, trying to find the station again, but the needle seemed to have a mind of its own. The frequencies shifted erratically, jumping from one station to another, snippets of voices and music blending into a chaotic symphony. It was then that I heard a voice breaking through the static, low and strained. "Help me." I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. The voice was faint, distorted, as if struggling to reach through layers of static and time. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to pinpoint the signal, but the voice kept slipping away, buried beneath the hiss and crackle. I adjusted the antenna, moving it slowly, and the voice grew clearer, though still distant. "They buried me wrong." My breath caught in my throat. The air around me seemed to grow colder, the wind biting through my jacket. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing among the gravestones, but there was only darkness. The radio continued its maddening dance through the frequencies, and the voice came again, more urgent. "They don't know I'm still here." A chill ran down my spine. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial back and forth, trying to make sense of the words. It was as if the radio had tapped into a different world, a place where voices lingered long after they should have been silent. I could almost hear the desperation in the tone, a raw, rasping sound that clawed its way out of the ether. I called out into the darkness, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" The radio crackled, the voice wavering. For a moment, there was silence, as if the unseen speaker had paused to listen to me. Then it returned, softer now, as if confiding a terrible secret. "John Garrett, they left me alone." I felt a shudder pass through me. The name echoed in my mind, unfamiliar yet somehow filled with a heavy weight. I scanned the nearby headstones with my flashlight, but the names blurred under the beam. My pulse quickened as I realized that whoever or whatever was speaking through the radio was buried somewhere nearby. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The radio whined, the frequencies distorting, and then the voice spoke again, each word slow and deliberate. "Find me. They can't hear me. I'm trapped." A burst of static filled the air, and the voice was gone. I spun the dial frantically, but all I heard was the empty hiss of the radio waves. I sat there for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. It felt like the darkness around me was pressing closer, the shadows deeper, the cold more biting. I grabbed the radio and fled the cemetery, not daring to look back. Back home, I tried to shake off the feeling that clung to me like cobwebs. I sat down at my computer and typed the name into the search bar. John Garrett. A list of articles and obituaries appeared, but one link caught my eye. It was a local news story from nearly a decade ago, titled Tragic Death at Hollowbrook Cemetery. My hand hovered over the mouse before I clicked on it, a sense of dread unfurling in my gut. The article described a man named John Garrett who had gone missing in the woods near the cemetery. His body was discovered weeks later, buried in an unmarked grave near the edge of the grounds. But there was something off about the story. According to the report, the coroner found signs that Garrett had been buried alive. Scratches on the inside of the casket, his fingers worn down to the bone. The authorities had dismissed it as a tragic accident, a case of mistaken death, but the locals whispered that it was something else, something darker. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details, each line more horrifying than the last. The memory of that voice on the radio echoed in my mind, and a sickening realization settled over me. It wasn't just a coincidence. Garrett's spirit, his voice, had somehow reached out to me from that lonely grave. I shut my laptop and tried to calm my racing thoughts, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a prickling at the back of my neck. I turned the radio back on, hoping to drown out the silence, but as I adjusted the dial, it returned to Garrett's voice, barely more than a whisper, slipping through the static. "You found me, but they still don't. Listen." The radio cut out, leaving me in the dark with a hum of dead air. My mind raced with questions. What did he mean? Who was they? But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had happened to Garrett wasn't just a mistake. And now his presence clung to me as if he had crossed some invisible threshold. Over the next few days, the radio's behavior grew even stranger. I'd hear faint whispers at odd hours, and once in the middle of the night, it turned on by itself, filling the room with a low, mournful hum. I tried to get rid of it, tossing it into the trash, but the next morning I found it back on my porch, the dial set to a station that didn't exist. The whispers continued, blending with my own thoughts until I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. One night, as I lay in bed, the voice returned, louder than before, filling my room with its desperate plea. "Please, they're coming for you, like they did for me." A shadow moved across the room just beyond the edge of my vision. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the faint hum of the radio and Garrett's voice, growing fainter with every passing second as if something was pulling him away. "You can't escape." The radio fell silent, and I was left alone with the darkness and my own racing heartbeat. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning I was determined to find answers. I drove back to the cemetery, the roads winding through the misty woods, but when I arrived, I found the area near Garrett's supposed grave disturbed. Fresh earth, as if something or someone had recently clawed its way out. I turned back to my car, every nerve screaming for me to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard it again, Garrett's voice, not from the radio this time, but from the shadows between the trees. "They're coming, and now they know your name too." The shadows shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something moving in the mist, a figure with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in silent agony. I drove away as fast as I could, but the sense of being followed never left me. Now, even far from that cursed place, I still hear the voice on the edge of every broadcast, whispering to me from the spaces between the stations. And sometimes, late at night when the radio crackles to life on its own, I hear other voices joining Garrett's voices that seem to know me, calling my name with a terrible familiarity. I know that one day the static will swallow me too, just like it did with him. And when it does, I'll be the one reaching out, begging for someone to hear me. I always believed that fears only exist in our minds, but everything changed that night when I heard the first steps on the stairs. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of old wood, but soon I realized the creaks were too rhythmic, too alive. Someone or something was coming up to me in the dark, and that was just the beginning. Moving into an old house on the outskirts of town seemed like a good idea. The silence, the absence of hustle and bustle, everything you need after long working days. The house was old but cozy, with spacious rooms, high ceilings, and large windows that let in the light. The staircase leading to the second floor creaked with every step, adding a special charm to the house, as if the old mansion was keeping secrets it didn't want to reveal. During the first few days, I was enchanted by this place. I loved getting up early in the morning and watching the sunlight seep through the dusty windows, filling the rooms with a soft glow. The kitchen, with its cracked tiles and old refrigerator, felt like a real find, and the living room with the fireplace gave a sense of comfort. But what fascinated me the most was the sound of the wind whispering between the old trees outside the window and the patter of raindrops on the roof. It all reminded me of childhood and summer vacations in the countryside, but one night I heard something I didn't expect. A creak. It wasn't the usual sound from the wind or old boards. It was too distinct, too rhythmic. I opened my eyes and listened. The sound was like footsteps, slow, measured, as if someone was carefully stepping on each stair, testing their strength. I chalked it up to old wood, probably cracking with age, and fell asleep with difficulty. The next night the sound repeated, but this time it was more insistent. The steps became part of a nightly ritual, waking me up at the same time every night at 3 o'clock. The steps seemed to be approaching, as if someone was slowly climbing the stairs, step by step, stopping right in front of my bedroom door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. After all, the house was old, and the noises could be the result of its age. But when one morning I went downstairs, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. On the dusty steps of the staircase, there were clear footprints as if someone had walked up barefoot. The steps weren't mine. I never walked barefoot in the house, and the footprints led only upward with no trace of a return. I tried not to think about it, convincing myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But with each passing night, I felt fear slowly creeping into my thoughts, like a cold mist filling the room. I started noticing small things, strange shadows in the corners when I walked by, a faint smell of dampness, as if someone had been in the house for a long time and never left. On the fourth night, I decided to check. I sat by the door holding a flashlight, trying not to make a sound. Time moved slowly. The clock hands crawled toward 3 o'clock. And then, as the minute hand froze at 3, I heard the steps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was savoring each step. I kept my hand on the door handle, holding my breath, and when the steps stopped right outside the door, I flung it open. There was no one on the stairs, but the flashlight illuminated the prints on the steps. They were wet, as if someone had just walked up them barefoot, leaving damp spots behind. The air carried a faint smell of rot, like water that had been stagnant in a basement. A wave of icy fear washed over me. I rushed back to my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and didn't leave until morning. After that night, I began locking my bedroom door. It gave me a false sense of security, but every evening as I lay down to sleep, I felt fear filling my room, as if the shadows were growing thicker. One night, I woke up to a loud bang, as if someone had forcefully pushed the door to my bedroom. The lock held, but I heard quiet, ragged breathing from the other side of the door, accompanied by a whisper that was barely audible. I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to make a sound. In the darkness of the room, I thought I saw the shadow outside the door slowly shift, as if trying to peer through the cracks. I closed my eyes and tried not to breathe, praying for the nightmare to end. That night, I didn't close my eyes. In the morning, I decided to leave, but I knew it was an escape. Whatever I did, this fear wouldn't leave me, but staying in the house became impossible. I packed my things and arranged with the realtor for a move, but each night until that day became more unbearable. The last night before leaving was the worst. I lay in bed, trying not to think about what was happening, when suddenly I heard a quiet whisper seeping through the cracks in the door. It came from right outside the door, and there was something unnatural, cold in the voice. It wasn't just a human hiss. It was something that crept directly into my mind. "I know you're listening," it whispered mockingly. I froze, feeling goosebumps run down my skin. The voice continued, growing more spiteful and taunting. "Why do you lock the door? I'll come in anyway. You know I'm here." I jumped out of bed and ran to the exit without thinking. The stairs creaked under my feet, but the sound was muffled by my fear. When I flung open the front door, for a moment I thought I saw in the hallway mirror the reflection of a shadow standing behind me. It was smiling, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, but when I turned around, no one was there. Just the empty hallway and the quiet creak of door hinges. For a moment I thought I heard the distant echo of footsteps on the stairs fading away, but I didn't wait to find out. The next day I left. I tried to forget this house, leaving it behind like a bad dream. But every night, waking up in the new apartment, I still hear those footsteps. Now they sound faint, as if far away, but sometimes they come closer and closer until they stop right outside my bedroom, and I'm not sure if the lock will hold this time.